I hope you like gacha-style crafting in your MMO. Spending 4 hours mining iron ore, smelting down and crafting an epic weapon with the absolute worst stats it can have because you barely succeeded the craft. I don't know about you, but this sounds like a creative way to make the most important system in the game absolutely insufferable. Now, of course, I could be wrong, and the crafting system they settle on when the game finally releases works absolutely beautifully for the game, and players happily spend hundreds or even thousands of hours with the crafting system in Pax Dei. But right now, we're in alpha, and we're renting a room in Speculation City. So let's speculate on this potentially problematic gacha crafting system, but in order to do so, we have to talk about Path of Exile. Now, my PoE experience is a little dated, so if things have changed, let me know in the comments below. Crafting in Path of Exile is RNG based, and the goal is to improve an item's stat to the point where it becomes usable for your build, or even a best in slot piece for that build. As you kill enemies, they drop random gear and random currency. When crafting an item to improve its functionality, you'll take the base item and apply the appropriate piece of currency to it. The result you get is completely random and in some cases permanent, and thanks to RNG, a player can spend thousands of random currency hunting for the best result and wind up with a broken piece of gear and an empty currency stab instead. Now that you got the really dumbed down basics of crafting in Path of Exile, here's what Peter said in the interview with Narc.
So like when you master craft something, when you get like a perfect result, that can actually influence the stats on the item that you created.
Oh.
It might also introduce like a random like new trait to the item, which can like be like a passive effect or a triggered effect or even like a special spell.
They said this again in their recent Alpha 2 announcement, where the item you're crafting will be affected by how big this little blue bar gets when you craft the item, ranging from stats or active and passive skills. But since we have no real insight into what makes the blue bar big, aside from our crafting level, we just have to wait for the gacha animation to finish to see what we end up with. But they did also say this.
And then like give the player some tools to influence that RNG by adding like optional ingredients to like, oh, if I already have this sword with a fire proc on it, I really want to get like the passive that gives me like better proc rate or like better attack rate with a weapon, so I proc it more often. When I'm trying to craft this sword over and over again, I can like add ingredients to like increase the chance that I actually get the passive that I really want.
So we would have the opportunity to add more materials to the craft to influence the outcome. This is sort of in place already, since there are some gear recipes for plain leather shoulders that have an identical recipe for shoulders with a spell attached, and it only requires one additional ingredient. I guess that means that they're not identical if one ingredient is different, but the idea is similar and you know what I mean. Now listen to this.
Oh, so you're leaning quite heavily into the RNG, like mass producing a weapon and hoping that you get an RNG proc that's really, really good. Is that kind of like what you're aiming for when it comes to like crafting gear?
Kind of leaning into kind of the ability to kind of experiment and like come up with like cool kind of kits, like, you know, and a kind of cool combination, like, yeah, cool combinations of like gear and weapons that synergize in a cool way, and that you feel like you can, you know, you might be following somebody else's kind of idea of their kit, but you like happen to get other cool bonuses that like just like opening up like a lot of like experimentation on creating your own role based on your gear.
While Narc correctly asked if they were leaning into the RNG of crafting, Peter called it experimentation and coming up with cool kits and combinations of gear and weapons to define a build. It didn't exactly address what Narc was talking about, but there is a negative and positive way to look at this clip. The negative way is that farming ore takes hours for higher tier items. If you spend that time gathering items, you could wind up with a trash item in regards to its stats, forcing you to farm for hours again in order to try for a different result. You could utilize the system that uses additional materials to influence a craft and still wind up with an unfavorable result. Maybe a fire sword with a bonus to lightning damage. Basically, experimentation in Pax Dei will require many many hours of gathering in order to find a favorable crafting result thanks to its roots in RNG. However, the positive way to think about this is that whatever result you get from this RNG crafting system won't be trash, but will be great for a different build than you had originally planned. And even if you're dead set on a specific build, it becomes easier to find gear for that build when you remember that a crafter will be crafting many items in order to level up, and perhaps they have your perfect item in one of their boxes of stuff that they've been leveling off of. Near the end of the first alpha, I was grinding out leather boots in order to level, and had put several of those boots in a box for clan members to come and pick them up if they wanted them. With this RNG system, each of those pairs of boots would be different, and different players might want one of those pairs if the stats were good for whatever build that they were going for. I think that is the goal of the crafting system from what Peter said, but when we start getting to endgame gear and the sheer amount of grinding it's going to take to farm those materials, not to mention the rarity of some materials, I think that's when the RNG side of the system is going to be problematic. In the upcoming Alpha 2 for Pax Dei, I don't think we'll be seeing any of this RNG crafting aside from pass-fail crafting, so it's still a ways off. I only hope that if Mainframe chooses to stick with this system, that they take a close look at how it will affect the gameplay loop for players and whether that loop turns out to be fun and rewarding or not. But hey, this is early development, and anything and everything can change by the time it's ready for release. So feedback from each alpha test is going to be very important as always. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. You're welcome.